Warning: All Things Crime is a true crime production that may contain violent or disturbing material. Viewer or listener discretion is advised.
You know, it's very hard to be a police officer nowadays. The expectations, the pay, everything. It's just something that they must really love in order to put their lives on the line because they literally do. You never know what's going to happen when you go to a scene. You don't know, if everything is going to be okay. But this is ridiculous because in when I was working for law enforcement, they don't like you until they need you. And when they need you, you better be there because they need you. And then when you're all right, they're not going to say anything because they don't want you to know who really did this to them. So they can do it again to another person because they're afraid or whatever reason. But you don't want police until you need them. And then when you need them, you pray to God they're going to be there.
Yeah. Anybody that's ever had to dial 911, I guarantee you, flat guarantee you, there's two people they are trying to call. One is the police and the other's God. And this kind of goes way back to the beginning of our conversation. I think that today's society forgets a little bit about the actual victim of these crimes. And it's not just the person, like if it's a murder, like in Angie Dodge's case, it's not just Angie that's the victim. I mean, her entire family and her entire community suffered from that, including the police agency. Idaho Falls PD, they suffered too. They're part of that community. But especially Carol and Angie's brother, it's amazing how much they have suffered over the past 20 years, not actually knowing who in reality, killed Angie. And the fact that's finally coming to a close. Yeah.
It's not just suffering, but literally, this is Carol's words. And I've talked to other people who have lost people. They're shattered. You can't put the pieces back together. What this does to families and anyone who works on that case, anybody, even Christopher Tapp and even Michael Ussery, who was thought to be, part of this, their lives, there's pieces that you can never gather. And this is very hard on families. And so, yeah, you're right. It does not just, if you were to count the people just in Angie's, I remember when I went up there just last week, there was so many people. I thought I had no idea, you got to think about this and this and all these people. And every family, you brought up a really good point. They don't just sit back there and wait to see what happens. A lot of them will do research. A lot of them will, I've worked cases for families because they want to have answers. And they really are very passionate about trying to bring some closure. There's really not closure, but some sense of some resolve. So that's a good point to make. But that was a touching case. And you're right, Carol Dodge, she's an amazing woman. She's so much courage and tenacity. 20 years she looked for the killer. 20 years. One of the things I need to bring up on all this, though, when it comes to cold cases, is we are starting to come out of the thinking that just the police department can solve it, because they don't always have all the technology. They don't have all the answers. And they're starting to reach out to forensic experts, and they're starting to reach out to these technologies and wanting to get the information and wanting the help. And it's really a team effort. And if you look at the Angie Dodge case, even though it took a very long time, when it started rolling, you could see the team effort. It was like dominoes falling. And honestly, Jared, if you remember, and you can tell this part, how Brian Dripps was caught, that genealogical end, when you think of it, it was a needle in a haystack, literally. And it was an amazing thing with everyone coming together for one purpose, to help each other and this family and law enforcement. It took all of them to make this happen. Not one person, all of them. It was amazing.
Yeah, the dominoes that fell, all based on Carol. I mean, she is the engine behind this entire train. And when she was just dissatisfied, the fact that she put it together that the DNA profile that they had from that semen stain on Angie's clothing did not match Christopher Tapp. So even though Christopher Tapp was sitting in prison and had been convicted of Angie's murder, Carol didn't accept that. She said, okay, maybe we've got one guy. And I know initially she believed that, yes, he was involved. And I know how much she hated him and that whole thing. But over time, she actually came to realize that that is so significant, that disparity in the case. But the Idaho Falls PD, they have so many other cases since then, and they had somebody in jail. So it was kind of, it's not that they had totally forgotten about it. It's just, police departments are amazingly busy. And these guys are literally running from case to case to case and from service call to service call. And it's their job to do the here and now. And so a lot of times these cold cases, they just don't have the resources to really investigate.
They're underfunded. They're underfunded. They don't have the money to pay for a lot of this. Our state labs, a lot of them are not adequately put up with all the technology. They don't get the funding they need to get it. Yeah. And police cannot afford all, because it's the private labs that have most of this high technology, and they're very expensive. And so people think, well, police aren't doing anything. Well, guess what? It costs a lot of money, just to do something very simple. You're talking, $1,000-$2,000 a sample or something.
Well, and I remember our own crime lab telling me that for a homicide, they can accept like 3 samples. I'm pretty sure you've told me that same thing. It's like you have to, in a homicide, for crying out loud.
And they take seven. They do 7 samples.
Oh, they expanded it then.
Yeah.
Wow.
It went to, I don't know what it is now. This has been a few years ago, but
okay.
And you have to remember though, on their part, they do the whole state of Utah, and so they can't. That's why I love what I do, because I can take my time and be very detailed on the cases because I work cold cases. Labs can't take all the time that I take on a case because they've got a lot to get through. And so you got to balance that out. It's kind of like police. What call are you going to go out on? Are you going to spend 20 hours on a recovery of a stolen vehicle? No, because it doesn't support the funding for that. Why would you spend on a recovery? Yeah, am I going to spend 20 on homicide? Yes, that does support that. So there's that funding issue.
Oh, they literally have to triage what they do. They have limited resources, and they have to spend the time where they're going to get the biggest bang for their buck. When they send officers out, it can't be, send 5 officers out to help recover, somebody's cat. They have to send, when there's a murderer on the loose, it's all hands on deck, and the entire agency will be mobilized to go catch that guy. But that's a much different level than a lot of the other, burglaries and things like that. And so it's a fine line. And I know that the population, the citizenry, they look at the police agencies and law enforcement in general, and they say, well, my case is important. I want you to pay attention to my case. And they do, and they will if they can. But at the same time, especially nowadays, oh my gosh, when you got politicians that are like, defund the police, take money. It's like NYPD took $1 billion away from, or the New York mayor, Bill de Blasio, took $1 billion away from NYPD. And yet he's the first one to complain when crime on the street is rising. Well, it's like, what do you expect?
It's very hard to be a police officer nowadays. The expectations, the pay, everything. It's just something that they must really love in order to put their lives on the line, because they literally do. You never know what's going to happen when you go to a scene. You don't know, if everything is going to be okay. But this is ridiculous, because when I was working for law enforcement, they don't like you until they need you. And when they need you, you better be there because they need you. And then when you're all right, they're not going to say anything because they don't want you to know who really did this to them. so they can do it again to another person because they're afraid or whatever reason. But you don't want police until you need them. And then when you need them, you pray to God they're going to be there.
Yeah. Anybody that's ever had to dial 911, I guarantee you, flat guarantee you, there's two people they are trying to call. One is the police, and the other's God.
Yep.
And you know,
Yeah.
if you're ever in a situation when you're actually picking up a phone and dialing 911, I guarantee you everything that has happened in the past goes out the window,
Yep.
because that is your crisis, and you want whatever help you can possibly muster.
Yep.
And I totally understand it. I've never actually been in that position, but I can certainly relate with it. And that's the moment.
I've been in that position, and I just want to run up and hug him and say, thank you for being here. Oh,
Yeah.
I can breathe. Thank you. I know what that's like. And you're absolutely right. This is something that's got to stop, or we're not going to have safe communities.
Yeah. Well, hey, before we end, I think this is a good transition point into what, as a crime scene investigator, what was some of the greatest moments that you ever experienced where the victim or the victim's family, where you helped solve their case? What was some of the responses that you got?
Oh, well, the one that really comes to my mind is on the Angie Dodge case, son, Christopher Tapp, finally being exonerated for the crime after he spent 20 years in prison. Christopher and I had never met. We had seen each other. We knew of each other, but I remember walking into the room when they were going to exonerate him, and they had the news conference after, and I saw him sitting there, and I just remember us hugging each other and him saying in my ear, "Thank you, thank you." And he was a very young man when he went in. He was 20 something years old, and so much had happened. And if you listen to anything he has to say, it could not have been easy in prison during that time. And that I really hold close to my heart. There's a lot I'm working on right now through with law enforcement and also families. But there's one specific one, and I won't bring it up right now, but um, it's going to be solved. I have no doubt we've got good stuff on that. But I'll never forget the mom, telling me and hugging me and say, "I've waited so long, and what this has done to my family. We need to heal. We need to heal." And it was I was privy to what this had caused the family and some of the things that had been very difficult for this mother to watch over the years happen, and that really touched. I've had so many like I said, on when my shell casings produced a profile, I knew I would be able to help other people, and that was such a wonderful moment. I have helped families. In fact, I'm doing one right now that this woman has literally mortgaged her house trying to get answers on cases, and she found out about what I do, and she's come to me, and I'm so she's so grateful because when we look at the evidence, I talk about what I have and what's going to be something good to work with and why it would or would not be. And we're not going to move ahead on this until we test this to see if this happens first, because the answer could be in this piece of evidence. And they're so grateful that I'm not soaking them for money because, believe it or not, a lot of families will pay anything. A lot of police pay a lot of money to get things done. And just to being able to look at it logically and say, a lot of times you'll have evidence and you send it to a lab and they'll do all the evidence, and you don't need to do all of it. You can break it down. You can do, the most probative 3 items, and let's see what we get off that. And if we're not getting, then we'll move on down. And she was so sweet. And I know this has been you can tell her heart just aches, so badly. Um, I have one I'm going to work on. It's really exciting, and it's one of the cases that the MVAC helped on was the Crystal Bislanowicz case with the rock. And I'll never forget that, how excited I was on that one, because a rock, you go to crime scenes, oh, they used a rock to do this or whatever, and A lot of places didn't collect the rocks, because what could you get from a rock? You can't fingerprint it, can't swab
Right.
it for DNA. So when that happened, that was huge, just really, really huge in my book, because now when I have a couple of cases, they have items similar, and I'm just so excited because I know it can happen and I know we can do this. I just think that anytime you touch someone's life, whether it's a family or law enforcement, or you do something, you've touched the whole. It's not just one life. You've touched the whole, and you help. I think that there's a lot of stuff that still needs to happen that I'd really like to look forward to in the future. But at this point, I don't think society is, really wanting some things, and some things will have to happen. And one of those would be, you have the DNA genealogical databases. And I understand, totally understand. I don't want my DNA put in a database where anybody could check it out. I do understand that thought process. I truly do. But then there's the other side where we have people that have been murdered or missing people. We don't know whose family these bones belong to. That if we could have access, we do have some access, but have access to check that out under certain conditions, and those have to be regulated just like you would a laboratory or thing. You regulate the conditions of what can be checked in a database. Society isn't really ready for all that, but I guarantee you that it'll probably be after I'm gone, but there will be a time when people's DNA is collected and they will have it anyway. So, PKU, they do now. Who knows what happens to all that stuff, but I'm just saying it'll happen at some point.
Yeah. It's interesting when you talk about the Crystal Bislanowicz case and the rock, and based on that, there was an agency that during the riots last summer, they had informed their officers that if any projectiles hit an officer and injures the officer, that collect it, and they did, and it was a brick. And so during these riots, one of the officers had got hit, and I think he was hit in the head with one of the bricks that the rioters had thrown, and they were able to collect that brick, get DNA off of it using the MVAC. And then
Yes.
as it turned out, yeah, isn't that cool?
Yes.
So as it turned out, this guy, he was Antifa, he was just a anarchist, and he's in prison now. So
Sweet.
yeah, or at
Great
least
call. Police are getting smarter too, and this is great. It's like, pick up the rock, pick up the bricks, look for these things. The one thing I do want to say though, on the shell casings, the one obstacle I'm running into is a lot of officers, police agencies send their shell casings into their lab to be processed for DNA and fingerprints, and they know that they get the same results back, inconclusive, or they don't get anything. And so if they can give those to me before any cross-contamination, anybody touches them, they get them right back. They'll be in good shape for them to enter into the NIBIN database for shell casings. But knowing what to collect, how to handle it, is really crucial for law enforcement. And if you remember, crime scene did not become really popular until after the O.J. Simpson case because of how things were handled. And they didn't do anything really that much out of the ordinary. A lot of agencies did it, but that's when crime scene units started to spring up in different law enforcement, is because how you handle evidence, how you collect it, how the chain of custody was pivotal. And so that's when things started changing, and it just gets better, it does. But handling that evidence and knowing what to do, and I was so great on that brick. I love it.
Yeah, it's cool. So all these guys out there rioting, if they're throwing bricks and even like Molotov cocktails, things like that, if it's collected properly, then we can get DNA off of it, and those people are going to jail. So
sweet.
All right, Francine. Well, it has been fantastic. We could go on and on. I mean, there's lots more things that we need to talk about, and so we'll have to have you on again. But yeah, it's been so interesting, and it's fun to finally get your past and your career path and everything on the show here. So I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, I'd love it. Thank you so much, Jared. It's great to just be talking to you again.
I know, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's do it again. Let's do it
Okay.
again soon.
Okay.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
Okay. Bye, Jared.
Okay, bye.